2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. That was the official tally, the one Alara kept locked in a secret ledger in her mind. It was the precise duration of the ache that had taken up permanent residence in her chest, a dull, constant throb that sharpened into a blade whenever Chloe smiled at her in that specific, unguarded way. It was the length of time she had been irrevocably, hopelessly in love with her best friend. Her roommate. The other half of her world. Tonight, the ache was a particularly vicious thing. It twisted under her ribs as she sat curled on one end of their worn, gray sofa, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. The television cast flickering blue light across the living room, but the movie was just noise, a backdrop to the real drama unfolding beside her. Chloe was on the other end of the sofa, phone pressed to her ear, her voice a low, frustrated murmur. It was another fight with Mark. It was always another fight with Mark. Alara focused on the steam rising from her mug, watching it curl and dissipate into the dim light. It was easier than watching Chloe's face, which was currently a canvas of disappointment. Her brow was furrowed, her free hand twisting a loose thread on a cushion, her beautiful, full lips pressed into a thin, unhappy line. Every ounce of Alara's being screamed to reach out, to smooth the worry from Chloe's forehead, to take the phone and tell Mark to leave her alone forever. But she did not. She couldn't. Her role was etched in stone, the supportive friend, the steady shoulder, the keeper of secrets that were not her own. "No, Mark, that's not what I mean, and you know it," Chloe whispered, her voice tight with unshed tears. It feels like you're not listening. It feels like you haven't really seen me in months." A familiar, bitter poison seeped into Alara's bloodstream. "I see you," she thought, the words so loud in her head she feared they might escape. "I see the way your eyes crinkle when you laugh for real, not the polite laugh you use with him. I see the tiny fleck of gold in your left iris that glows in the sunlight. I see the exhaustion you try to hide behind your bright smile every time you come home from a date with him. I see all of it. I see you." She took a careful sip of her tea, the hot liquid a poor substitute for the comfort she wished she could offer. The rules of their friendship were a complex, invisible architecture she had helped build, and the primary rule was that Mark was a fixture, a problem to be solved, a topic for late-night analysis, but never a rival to be vanquished. To admit her true feelings would be to take a sledgehammer to that foundation, and she was terrified the whole structure would come crashing down, burying her in the rubble of what they used to be. Losing the friendship was a possibility more terrifying than the slow, daily torment of wanting more. Finally, Chloe sighed, a sound of pure defeat. "Fine. Yes, fine. I'll see you Saturday. Bye." She dropped the phone onto the cushion as if it had burned her hand. For a long moment, she just stared at the blank television screen, her shoulders slumped. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with everything she wasn't saying. Alara waited. This was part of the ritual. The fight, the hang-up, the waited silence, and then the turning. As if on cue, Chloe turned her body toward Alara, tucking her legs up under her on the sofa. Her big, hazel eyes, shimmering with moisture, found Alara's. "He doesn't get it," she said, her voice small. "What doesn't he get this time?" Alara asked, keeping her own voice soft, a gentle net to catch Chloe's fragile emotions. "Anything. Everything," Chloe lamented, gesturing vaguely with her hand. "I was trying to tell him about that promotion I'm up for at work, how nervous and excited I am, and he changed the subject. To his fantasy football league. He said I was overthinking it and that I'd get it, so there was no point in stressing. It was like he was just ticking a box. Listen to girlfriend talk about work, check, and then move on." The knife turned. Alara remembered the conversation they'd had just yesterday, when Chloe had first told her about the promotion. Alara had spent an hour with her, mapping out talking points for her meeting with her boss, practicing her pitch, and celebrating with a pint of their favorite ice cream. She had felt every flutter of Chloe's anxiety and every spark of her ambition as if they were her own. "He doesn't mean to be dismissive," Alara said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. It was the line she always used, the balm she applied to these wounds. "He's just, you know how men can be. Practical. They want to solve the problem, not just listen to the feeling. It was a pathetic, gendered excuse, and they both knew it, but it was part of the script. Chloe let out a humorless laugh. Is that what it is? Because it feels less like he's trying to solve a problem and more like he's waiting for his turn to speak. She sighed and scooted a little closer, her knee almost brushing against Alara's. The proximity sent a jolt of heat through Alara's system, a low hum of electricity that she had to consciously ignore. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a part. The cool girlfriend, the one who doesn't get too emotional and who thinks his boring work stories are fascinating. I'm so tired of acting. Then stop, Alara wanted to plead. Stop acting with him and just be with me. You never have to act with me. Instead, she offered a safe, practiced response. All relationships have a bit of that, don't they? Compromise, the word felt hollow, fraudulent. What she had with Chloe, this deep, unspoken thing that hummed between them, felt like the opposite of compromise. It felt like truth. Chloe looked down at her hands, picking at a cuticle. I guess she was quiet for another minute, and Alara could feel the conversation shifting, moving into more dangerous territory. It's just, with you, it's so easy. I never feel like I have to translate myself. You just get it. You get me. Her eyes lifted, and they were so earnest, so full of a raw, confusing emotion that Alara's breath hitched. This was the precipice. The edge of the cliff she teetered on every day. She had to pull them both back. That's because we're best friends, Alara said, forcing a small, reassuring smile. That's what we do. We've had years of practice at getting each other. She tried to inject a lightness into her tone, to steer them back to the safe, solid ground of platonic love. Chloe's expression didn't change. It was as if she hadn't heard the word friends. Her gaze was intense, searching. Is it supposed to be this hard, Al? Love? Is it supposed to make you feel lonelier? The question hung in the air between them, fragile and shimmering. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. No, it screamed. It's supposed to feel like this. Like sitting on a sofa with you. It's supposed to feel like home. She couldn't say that. So she said nothing at all. She just held Chloe's gaze, trying to pour all the support and love she felt into her eyes, hoping it would be read as friendship, nothing more. A single tear escaped Chloe's eye and traced a silent path down her cheek. Without thinking, Alara's hand lifted, her thumb gently brushing it away. The contact was brief, a feather-light touch, but it sent a shockwave through her. Chloe's skin was so soft. Chloe leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second. The movement was so small, so subtle, but it felt like a confession. It felt like a surrender. And it terrified Alara more than anything had in a very long time. She pulled her hand back as if burned, tucking it safely into the pocket of her hoodie. The moment was broken. Chloe blinked, a flicker of confusion in her eyes before it was replaced by a sad, weary smile. Sorry, she mumbled, wiping at her cheek with the back of her hand. I'm being dramatic. It's just a stupid fight. It's not stupid if it hurts you, Alara whispered, the words more true than anything she'd said all night. Chloe gave her a grateful look and then, in a move that shattered Alara's fragile composure, she uncurled her legs and stretched out on the sofa, laying her head in Alara's lap. It was a casual, familiar gesture they had shared 100 times before. But tonight, it felt different. It felt heavier. Charged. Alara's entire body went rigid. She could feel the warmth of Chloe's scalp through the thin fabric of her jeans. She could smell the faint, sweet scent of her shampoo, a mix of vanilla and something floral that was uniquely her. Alara's hand hovered in the air for a moment, uncertain. The script called for her to stroke Chloe's hair, to offer the easy, physical comfort of a friend. But her fingers trembled. The thought of touching her felt too intimate, too loaded with the weight of her 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days of secret love. Tired, Chloe murmured, her voice already thick with sleepiness, her body relaxing into Alara's. Slowly, tentatively, Alara lowered her hand and rested it on Chloe's hair. The strands were soft and silky beneath her palm. She forced her muscles to relax, to begin the slow, rhythmic motion of stroking her hair. With every pass of her fingers, she felt a piece of her own heart breaking and healing, all at once. This was her heaven and her hell. To have Chloe so close, so trusting, so vulnerable, and to know that it was all under the guise of a friendship she was terrified to destroy. She stared at the television, the blue light washing over them, and resigned herself to another night of playing her part, the silent keeper of a love that lived and breathed only in the suffocating quiet of her own heart. The next few days passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Chloe made up with Mark, a temporary truce declared over a dinner Alara heard about in excruciating detail. He had brought her flowers, peonies, which she loved, and apologized for being distracted. Chloe recounted the story with a tone of determined optimism, as if trying to convince herself as much as Alara that this was a sign of progress, that things were getting better. Alara listened, nodded, and said all the right things, her own heart a leaden weight in her chest. Each of Chloe's hopeful words felt like a stone being placed on top of it. But something had shifted that night on the sofa. A crack had appeared in the smooth facade of their friendship. Alara felt it in the way Chloe's eyes lingered on her a second too long over their morning coffee, in the way their shoulders seemed to brush more often as they navigated their small kitchen. Or maybe she was imagining it. Hope was a cruel and inventive liar, and Alara had learned to mistrust it. The breaking point, the event that would irrevocably alter the landscape between them, arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening. Alara was curled up on the armchair, lost in a book, the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane a soothing companion. The front door opened and closed with a quiet click, and she looked up, expecting Chloe's usual cheerful greeting. Instead, Chloe stood in the entryway, dripping wet, her face pale and streaked with rain and tears. Her jacket was unzipped, her hair plastered to her forehead, and she was clutching her bag to her chest like a shield. She looked utterly broken. Alara was on her feet in an instant, the book falling forgotten to the floor. "Chloe? What's wrong? What happened?" Chloe's eyes met hers, and a fresh wave of tears spilled over. She shook her head, unable to speak, a choked sob escaping her lips. Alara crossed the room in 3 strides, her heart pounding with a cold, rising dread. She reached out and gently took Chloe's arm, leading her further into the living room, away from the cold of the doorway. "You're freezing," Alara said, her voice soft. "Let's get you out of these wet things." She helped Chloe shrug off her soaked jacket, her fingers clumsy with worry. Chloe was passive, pliant, her body trembling under Alara's touch. It wasn't just from the cold. Once the jacket was off, Alara wrapped the soft throw blanket from the sofa around Chloe's shoulders. She guided her to the sofa and sat her down, kneeling on the floor in front of her. "Chloe, talk to me. Did something happen with Mark?" Chloe nodded, her chin wobbling. She hugged the blanket tighter around herself. "We're done," she whispered, the words barely audible over the rain. "It's over." For real this time, a strange, contradictory mix of emotions surged through Alara. There was a fierce, triumphant leap of joy in her heart, a selfish, ugly thing that she immediately crushed. It was followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated empathy for the woman crumbling before her. The only thing that mattered was Chloe's pain. "Oh, honey," Alara murmured, taking Chloe's cold hands in her own. "I'm so sorry." "What happened?" Chloe took a shuddering breath, trying to compose herself. "It was everything. All the little things. The not listening, the dismissiveness, it all just built up. We were at dinner, and he was on his phone the entire time, barely looking at me. I finally asked him what was so important, and he said he was setting his fantasy lineup for the week. And I snapped," her voice cracked. "I told him I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be with someone who made me feel invisible." She looked at Alara, her eyes wide and pleading. "He didn't even fight for it, Elle. He just looked surprised. And then he said, if that's how you feel, and that was it. He just let me walk out." The cruelty of it, the casual indifference, sent a white-hot spike of anger through Alara. She squeezed Chloe's hands. "He's an idiot," she said, her voice fierce with conviction. "He never deserved you. Not for a second, that was all it took. The dam broke. Chloe's face crumpled, and she began to sob in earnest, deep, ragged breaths that shook her entire frame. Alara's heart broke for her. Without a second thought, she moved from the floor to the sofa, pulling Chloe into her arms, holding her tight as she cried. Chloe buried her face in the crook of Alara's neck, her tears soaking the collar of Alara's shirt, her hands clutching at the fabric of her back. Alara held her, rocking her gently, whispering soothing nonsense into her hair. "It's okay. I've got you. Just let it all out. I'm right here." She held on as if she could absorb all of Chloe's pain into herself, as if her own steady heartbeat could regulate Chloe's frantic, shattered one. This was familiar territory, but the finality of it made it different. There was no Mark to go back to this time. There was no makeup dinner, no apology flowers. There was only this. The end of one thing and the terrifying, uncertain beginning of something else. They stayed like that for a long time, the only sounds in the room the drumming of the rain and Chloe's slowly quieting sobs. Eventually, her breathing evened out and the desperate grip on Alara's shirt loosened. She pulled back slightly, her face red and swollen, her eyes exhausted. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You'll never have to find out," Alara promised, her hand coming up to cup Chloe's cheek, her thumb stroking the damp skin. Chloe leaned into her touch again, just as she had the other night, but this time her eyes were open, watching Alara's face with a new, raw intensity. The air between them crackled. The space felt sacred, fragile. After a long moment, Chloe's gaze dropped to Alara's mouth. It was a fleeting glance, so quick Alara might have missed it if she hadn't been studying every minute detail of Chloe's expression. But she saw it, and her world tilted on its axis. Chloe seemed to catch herself, pulling back completely and wrapping the blanket more tightly around her, creating a physical barrier between them. She shivered. "I'm so cold, let's get you into a hot shower," Alara suggested, her own voice sounding strained to her ears. "I'll make you some tea." The strong kind, Chloe nodded numbly. She looked small and lost in the big living room. As she stood up to head to the bathroom, she paused and looked back at Alara. Her expression was unreadable. "Elle," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah." A beat of hesitation. Chloe seemed to be wrestling with a thought, a question she couldn't quite bring herself to ask. Finally, she just shook her head. "Nothing. Just, thanks." For being you, Alara watched her disappear down the hall, and the silence she left behind was more profound than before. It was a silence filled with possibility and terror. The status quo had not just been broken, it had been shattered. Mark was gone, and Chloe was looking at her lips. Alara sank back onto the sofa, her body trembling, and put her head in her hands. She had no idea what came next, but she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. The carefully constructed walls of their friendship were starting to crumble, and she didn't know if she was ready for what lay on the other side. Later that night, long after the rain had stopped and the city had fallen into a hushed quiet, Alara lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She had listened for the sounds of Chloe in her own room across the hall, the soft rustle of sheets, the sigh of settling into sleep, but there was only silence. She assumed Chloe had finally succumbed to emotional exhaustion. A soft knock on her door made her jump. "Elle?" Chloe's voice was a whisper from the other side. "Are you awake?" Alara's heart began a frantic, panicked rhythm against her ribs. "Yeah," she called out, her own voice thick with sleep she wasn't feeling. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Chloe stood silhouetted in the dim light from the hallway. She was wearing one of Alara's old, oversized t-shirts, the one with the faded university logo that she always stole to sleep in. She was hugging her pillow to her chest. "I can't sleep," she said, her voice small and childlike. "My room feels too empty, too quiet." Alara understood immediately. The room was filled with the ghost of Mark, with the memories of phone calls and the lingering presence of a relationship that had just died. "Do you want to talk?" Alara offered, sitting up and switching on the small lamp on her nightstand. The room was cast in a soft, golden glow. Chloe shook her head. She took a tentative step into the room. No. I'm tired of talking. I'm tired of thinking. She looked at Alara, her eyes wide and vulnerable in the warm light. This is going to sound stupid, but can I sleep in here? With you? I don't want to be alone. The request landed in the center of Alara's chest like a stone, sending shockwaves out to every nerve ending in her body. It was the most dangerous, most longed-for question she could have imagined. Her bed, her space, was her only sanctuary from the overwhelming reality of her feelings for Chloe. To invite Chloe into it felt like inviting a flame into a room filled with gasoline. But one look at Chloe's desolate face, at the genuine fear and loneliness in her eyes, and Alara knew there was only one possible answer. The risk was hers to take, not Chloe's to bear. Of course, Alara said, her voice softer than she intended. She shifted over to one side of the double bed, pulling back the covers in invitation. Come on, a wave of relief washed over Chloe's features. She closed the door softly behind her and padded over to the bed, climbing in under the covers. The mattress dipped with her weight. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, keeping a careful, respectful distance between them, the pillow she'd brought still clutched to her chest like a barrier. The silence was deafening. Alara was acutely aware of everything, the subtle scent of her own lavender-scented laundry detergent on the t-shirt Chloe was wearing, the warmth radiating from Chloe's body across the small gap of empty space, the sound of their breathing, almost in sync. Her own body was a taut wire of tension. She lay perfectly still, afraid that any movement would betray the wild, chaotic storm inside her. This was the true catalyst. Not the breakup itself, but this quiet, terrifying intimacy. This decision to cross a threshold into a shared space that had always been sacred and separate. The world had shifted, and this bed had become the new, uncharted territory. The weeks that followed the breakup were a delicate dance of recovery and recalibration. The apartment, once a backdrop for Chloe's romantic dramas with Mark, became a quiet haven. Chloe slowly began to piece herself back together, and Alara was her constant, steady shadow. They fell into a new rhythm, one defined by late-night movies, shared pints of ice cream, and long, meandering conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. It was during these conversations, usually held on their comfortable gray sofa with a single blanket thrown over both their laps, that the real changes began to surface. The discussions were no longer about Mark or the specifics of a failing relationship. They became broader, more philosophical. They talked about life, about happiness, about what it meant to truly connect with another person. I feel like I've been checking boxes my whole life, Chloe confessed one night, her head resting on a cushion near Alara's shoulder. Her voice was soft and introspective. Go to college, get a good job, find a nice boyfriend, get married. It's like I had a map that someone else drew, and I've just been following it without ever asking if I even wanted to go to the destination. Alara listened, her heart aching with a familiar pang. I think a lot of people feel that way, she said carefully. It's easy to get caught up in what you're supposed to want. Chloe turned her head, her warm breath ghosting over Alara's arm. But you don't, she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. You've never dated just for the sake of it. You've always seemed so sure of yourself. So content to be on your own until something real comes along. The irony was a physical blow. Alara, content. Alara, who spent every waking moment navigating a minefield of unrequited love, whose contentment was a carefully constructed facade to hide a heart that was anything but. I'm not sure that's true, Alara deflected, her gaze fixed on the muted television. I guess I know what I'm looking for. I don't want to settle for something that doesn't feel whole, Chloe repeated, the word a soft puff of air. That's it. That's the word. With Mark, it always felt like I was giving up pieces of myself to make the relationship work. I was sanding down my edges to fit into the box he had for me. But real love shouldn't feel like a compromise, should it? It should feel like an expansion. Like you're becoming more of yourself, not less. Yes, Alara screamed internally. It should feel like this. Talking to you. It makes me feel more myself than anything else in the world. Out loud, she only said, "I think so." As the conversations deepened, so did the physical intimacy, escalating in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. It started small. A lingering hug in the kitchen that lasted a few beats too long. Chloe's hand resting on Alara's knee as she made a point during a movie. Their shoulders pressing together on the sofa, with neither of them making a move to create distance. Each touch was a spark on Alara's skin, a tiny fire she had to consciously extinguish before it grew into an inferno. The most charged moments were the ones that seemed to happen by accident. One afternoon, they were cooking dinner together, moving around the small kitchen in a comfortable, practiced rhythm. Alara was reaching for a spice on a high shelf when her foot slipped slightly on a stray drop of water. She stumbled backward, and Chloe, who was right behind her, reacted instantly, her hands shooting out to steady her. One of Chloe's hands landed flat on her stomach, the other on her arm. The contact, so sudden and firm, sent a jolt of pure electricity through Alara's body. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. She could feel the warmth of Chloe's palm seeping through the thin cotton of her shirt, a radiating heat that seemed to touch something deep inside her. "Whoa, got you," Chloe said, her voice a little breathless. They were standing impossibly close, Alara's back pressed against Chloe's front. Alara could feel the soft pressure of Chloe's body against hers, could smell the faint, clean scent of her skin. "Thanks," Alara managed to whisper, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, neither of them moved. Chloe's hands remained where they were, a steady, grounding pressure. Alara was acutely aware of Chloe's chin hovering just above her shoulder. It would take nothing, just the slightest turn of her head, for their cheeks to touch. The thought was so potent, so overwhelming, that it made her dizzy. Then, as if waking from a trance, Chloe seemed to realize their position. She quickly pulled her hands away, stepping back and creating a chasm of cool air between them. "Sorry," she said, her cheeks flushing a faint pink. "You okay?" "Fine. Just clumsy," Alara said, turning back to the spice rack, her hands trembling as she grabbed the paprika. She didn't look at Chloe. She couldn't. The moment had been too raw, too revealing. It was a glimpse of a different reality, one where a touch like that wasn't an accident to be apologized for, but an invitation. The culmination of this escalating tension happened on a lazy Saturday afternoon. They were sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by old photo albums Chloe had unearthed from her closet in a fit of post-breakup cleaning. Laughter filled the apartment as they pointed out awkward high school haircuts and questionable fashion choices. "Oh my God, look at this one," Chloe giggled, pointing to a photo of them on their college graduation day. They were grinning at the camera, arms thrown around each other, full of hope and uncertainty. "We look like babies, we were babies," Alara agreed, a fond smile on her face. Her gaze drifted from the photograph to the real Chloe beside her. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, catching in her hair and turning it to spun gold. She looked beautiful. Not just beautiful in the objective way she always was, but beautiful in a way that made Alara's chest physically ache. Chloe must have felt her gaze, because she looked up from the album, her laughter fading. Her eyes met Alara's, and the playful atmosphere evaporated, replaced by something quiet and intense. Alara watched, mesmerized, as Chloe's gaze flickered down, just for a second, to her lips. It happened again. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a trick of the light. Chloe seemed to notice the shift, the sudden charge in the air. A nervous energy took over. She looked away, picking up Alara's hand from where it rested on the floor between them. "Your hands are so elegant," Chloe said, her voice a little too bright. She turned Alara's hand over, her thumb tracing the lines on her palm. "Mine are so clumsy," Alara's breath hitched. Chloe's touch was featherlight, but it sent shivers up her arm. She couldn't form a coherent thought, let alone a response. Chloe intertwined their fingers, her hand fitting perfectly into Alara's. She held it up, examining their joined hands as if they were a curious artifact. "Look at that," she said, a small, strange smile playing on her lips. A perfect fit. Alara's heart was going to beat its way out of her chest. This was too much. This was too direct. Sensing Alara's sudden stillness, Chloe's smile wavered. She quickly dropped their hands into her lap, but she didn't let go. If anything, her grip tightened slightly. "It's just a joke," she said quickly, a nervous laugh escaping her. "You know, like in the movies, the words were a dismissal, a safety valve to release the mounting pressure. It's just a joke." But her actions told a different story. She didn't let go. Her thumb began to stroke the back of Alara's hand in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. The gesture was anything but a joke. It was tender. It was deliberate. It was terrifying. Alara stared at their joined hands, at the way Chloe's fingers were woven through hers. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. The soft pressure of Chloe's skin, the warmth seeping into her own hand, the gentle, rhythmic stroking of her thumb. It was an anchor in a swirling sea of confusion and hope. Chloe had called it a joke, but she hadn't let go. And in that contradiction, in that small, silent act of defiance against her own words, Alara felt a tiny, dangerous seed of possibility begin to sprout in the barren landscape of her heart. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing, and she had no idea how to stop it from growing. The hand-holding incident became a silent, unspoken landmark. After that day, the air in the apartment was permanently charged, thick with things unsaid. Alara felt like she was walking on a high wire, every step, every word, every glance fraught with the potential to send her plummeting. To protect herself, to regain some semblance of control over her spiraling emotions, she began to pull away. It was a subtle retreat, a masterpiece of self-preservation. She started spending more evenings in her room with the door closed, claiming she had work to do. She made excuses to avoid their late-night movie sessions, pleading exhaustion. When they were in the kitchen together, she kept her movements brisk and efficient, avoiding the casual, lingering touches that had become so common. She was building a wall, brick by painful brick, hoping it would be high enough to shield her heart from the devastating hope that Chloe's recent behavior had ignited. She told herself it was for the best. Chloe was vulnerable, fresh out of a long-term relationship. She was likely just clinging to the closest, safest person in her life. Her actions, the lingering looks, the touches, the shared bed, were probably just a manifestation of grief and confusion, not a sign of genuine romantic interest. Alara would be a predator to take advantage of that, to read her own desperate desires into Chloe's actions. The only noble thing to do, the only friendly thing to do, was to give her space. But the logic, however sound, did little to soothe the ache. Every closed door felt like a betrayal. Every avoided glance was a fresh wound. She was a ghost in her own home, haunting the periphery of the life she so desperately wanted to be at the center of. Chloe, for her part, seemed bewildered by the change. Alara would catch her looking at her with a confused, hurt expression. The easy laughter between them became strained. The comfortable silences grew heavy with tension. Chloe tried to breach the new distance, knocking on Alara's door to ask if she wanted to watch a show, suggesting they go out for dinner. Each time, Alara would politely decline, her heart twisting with the effort of pushing her away. The confrontation Alara had been dreading finally came about a week into her self-imposed exile. She was in the kitchen, making a quick cup of tea before retreating back to her room, when Chloe walked in. Chloe didn't say anything at first. She just leaned against the counter, her arms crossed over her chest, watching Alara with an unreadable expression. Alara's hands felt clumsy as she fumbled with the tea bag. The silence stretched, thin and taut, until she couldn't bear it anymore. "Did you need something?" she asked, her voice sounding unnaturally formal. "Yes," Chloe said, her tone quiet but firm. "I need to know what's going on." Alara kept her back to her, focusing on pouring the hot water into her mug. "I don't know what you mean." "Nothing's going on, don't," Chloe said, and there was a sharp edge to her voice now. "Don't lie to me, Alara. You've been hiding from me for a week. You barely look at me. You jump if I get too close. It's like I'm a stranger in our own apartment. Did I do something? Did I say something wrong?" Alara closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She turned around slowly, leaning back against the counter, the warm mug a fragile shield in her hands. Chloe's face was a mixture of frustration and genuine pain. It was the last thing Alara had ever wanted to cause. "No, Chloe, you didn't do anything," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Then what is it?" Chloe pressed, taking a step closer. The intensity in her gaze was unnerving. "Because after my breakup, you were my rock. You were right there. And now you're gone. And I don't understand why. I need you to tell me why." Alara's mind raced, searching for a plausible lie, a safe excuse. "I'm just stressed with work. I haven't been feeling well. I need some time to myself." But looking at Chloe's earnest, pleading face, the lies died on her tongue. She was so tired of lying. I think you need some space," Alara said, the half-truth feeling almost as bad as a lie. "To heal. To figure things out on your own." "I don't want to be a crutch." Chloe let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A crutch? Alara, you're not a crutch. You're my best friend." Her voice softened, her expression turning vulnerable. "You're the most important person in my life. The idea of having space from you is the last thing I want. It feels like punishment. So please, just tell me the real reason." The directness of the question, the raw honesty in Chloe's eyes, stripped away all of Alara's defenses. The wall she had so carefully constructed crumbled to dust. There was nowhere left to hide. Alara looked down into her tea, unable to meet Chloe's gaze. "It's complicated then uncomplicated for me," Chloe said, her voice gentle now, coaxing. She took another step, closing the distance between them until only a foot of space remained. She reached out, her hand hovering in the air for a moment before she seemed to think better of it, letting it drop back to her side. The aborted gesture spoke volumes. The point of no return had arrived. Alara could either construct a new, more elaborate lie, one that would likely poison their friendship forever, or she could take the terrifying leap into the truth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and a wild, reckless hope. Chloe seemed to sense her internal struggle. She waited, her patience a tangible thing in the quiet kitchen. When Alara still didn't speak, Chloe's voice dropped to a near whisper. Is it because of that day? With the photo albums?" she asked, her voice hesitant. When I held your hand?" Alara's head snapped up. Her eyes met Chloe's, wide with shock. A flicker of something, understanding, maybe even confirmation, passed through Chloe's eyes. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since then," she began, her voice low and careful. "About Mark. About me. About us." The word us hung in the air, electric and terrifying. "I think," Chloe continued, her gaze unwavering, "I think I might not be as straight as I've always thought I was." The confession was quiet, but it landed in the room with the force of a thunderclap. "I think the reason I was so unhappy with Mark, with every guy I've ever dated, is that I was always looking for something they could never give me. A kind of connection, a feeling of being truly, completely seen." She took the final step, closing the space between them entirely. She was so close now that Alara could see the tiny gold fleck in her left iris, the one she had secretly catalogued in her memory. "I only ever feel that way with you, Elle," Chloe whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And it scares me. It scares me because I don't know what it means. But I know that pulling away from it, pretending it doesn't exist, feels wrong. It feels like I'm suffocating." She looked down at Alara's lips, and this time, she didn't look away. Her gaze was open, questioning, full of a terrifying, beautiful vulnerability. "I've been thinking," she whispered, her eyes lifting back to meet Alara's. "I've been thinking about kissing you," and there it was. The subtext had become text. The secret thought, the impossible dream, spoken aloud in the quiet of their kitchen. It was not a full declaration of love, not yet. It was something rawer, more honest. A confession of confusion, of desire, of a world knocked off its axis. Alara's carefully guarded heart shattered into a million pieces, not from pain, but from the blinding, terrifying light of a possibility she had never truly allowed herself to believe in. The high wire had vanished, and she was falling. She just didn't know if there was a net below. The three words echoed in the space between them, rewriting the history of their friendship, of every shared glance and lingering touch. I've been thinking about kissing you. Ilara's mind went completely blank. The carefully constructed arguments, the rationalizations for her distance, all of it evaporated in the face of Chloe's staggering honesty. All that was left was the raw, thrumming truth of her own heart, which was currently trying to beat its way out of her chest. She could only stare at Chloe, her own eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Was this real? Was this actually happening? Or was it some new, elaborate torture devised by her own hopeful imagination? Chloe seemed to mistake her stunned silence for rejection. A flicker of panic crossed her face, and she took a half-step back, her hands coming up in a gesture of surrender. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice suddenly losing its conviction. That was too much. I shouldn't have said that. I've made everything weird, haven't I? Forget I said anything. Please, the fear in Chloe's voice, the thought that she might retract the most beautiful words Ilara had ever heard, was the catalyst that finally broke Ilara's paralysis. "No," Ilara said, the word coming out as a choked whisper. She found her voice, stronger this time. "No, don't be sorry. Don't you dare take it back." She saw the confusion, then the dawning hope, in Chloe's eyes. It gave her the courage to continue, to finally, after 2 years, 4 months, and what felt like a lifetime of silence, speak her own truth. "You've been thinking about kissing me?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling. A hysterical little laugh bubbled up inside her. "Chloe, I've been thinking about kissing you for 862 days, she said the number without thinking, the tally from her secret mental ledger spilling out into the open. Chloe's brow furrowed in confusion. 800? What does that mean? Tears pricked at the corners of Ilara's eyes, tears of relief and terror and a joy so overwhelming it was painful. It means I've been in love with you for 2 years, 4 months, and, well, now it's probably closer to 25 days. I lost count this month. The confession tumbled out of her, clumsy and breathless and utterly real. That's why I pulled away. Because you broke up with Mark and you started looking at me and touching me and I couldn't handle it. The hope was too much. I thought I was imagining it. I thought you were just confused and grieving and I was terrified of losing you, of ruining the one thing in my life I couldn't bear to lose. She was rambling, her words tripping over each other, but she couldn't stop. It was a floodgate opened, a pressure valve released. Everything you said you were missing with him. The connection, the feeling of being seen. I wanted to be that for you so badly, but I thought I was only allowed to be your friend. Chloe stared at her, her own eyes shimmering with tears. She was completely still, processing the torrent of words, the years of hidden emotion that had just been laid bare at her feet. She looked from Ilara's eyes to her lips and back again. A slow, wondrous smile spread across her face, transforming her expression into one of pure, unadulterated awe. 2 years, she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Oh well, you beautiful, stupid, wonderful idiot. All this time. Ilara could only nod, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down her cheek. In one smooth motion, Chloe closed the small space between them. She raised her hands, but this time she didn't hesitate. Her palms came to rest on Ilara's cheeks, her thumbs gently stroking her jawline. The touch was electric, 1,000 volts of validation and promise. It was not the touch of a friend. It was the touch of something more. Can I? Chloe whispered, her voice husky, her gaze locked on Ilara's lips. It was a question, but it was also a plea. Can I kiss you now? Or do I have to wait for day 863? Ilara let out a shaky, watery laugh. Now, she breathed. Please, now, that was all the permission Chloe needed. She leaned in slowly, giving Ilara every opportunity to pull away, to stop it. But Ilara was rooted to the spot, her entire universe having shrunk to the few inches of air between their lips. She watched as Chloe's eyes fluttered shut, and then she closed her own, surrendering to the inevitable. The first touch was impossibly soft. It was just a gentle, tentative pressure of Chloe's lips against hers, a question asked without words. It was hesitant, shy, and more profound than any kiss Alara had ever imagined. It was a sigh of relief, a homecoming. All the years of pining, all the secret aches and silent longings, melted away in that single, chaste press of mouths. Alara's hands came up to rest on Chloe's waist, her fingers gripping the soft fabric of her shirt, anchoring herself to this new reality. She shifted her weight, leaning into the kiss, and Chloe responded instantly. The kiss deepened. It was no longer just a question. It was an answer. It was a conversation held in a language their bodies had been trying to speak for years. Chloe's hand slid from Alara's cheek into her hair, her fingers tangling in the soft strands at the nape of her neck, tilting her head to grant better access. Alara's lips parted on a soft gasp, and she felt Chloe's own breath, warm and sweet, mingle with hers. There was a sudden urgency, a release of years of pent-up emotion. It wasn't a kiss of frantic, desperate passion, but of profound, earth-shattering recognition. It was a kiss that said, "Oh, there you are. I've been looking for you." It was slow and deep and sure, a mapping of unfamiliar territory that felt, impossibly, like coming home. Every doubt Alara had ever harbored, every fear of rejection, was annihilated in the tender, certain movement of Chloe's mouth against hers. When they finally broke apart, it was not because either of them wanted to, but because the need for air became undeniable. They rested their foreheads together, their breathing heavy and ragged, their eyes still closed. Alara could feel Chloe's heart hammering against her chest, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. The silence in the kitchen was no longer tense or awkward. It was reverent, filled with the holy, sacred aftermath of a prayer answered. "Wow," Chloe breathed out, the word a soft puff of air against Alara's lips. "Yeah," Alara whispered back, her voice barely audible. Chloe pulled back just enough to look at her, her hazel eyes shining with an emotion so deep and radiant it took Alara's breath away. A small, wondrous smile played on her lips, the same lips that had just fundamentally altered the course of Alara's life. "That felt," Chloe started, trailing off as if she couldn't find a word big enough. "Right," Alara finished for her, the words settling between them with the simple, undeniable weight of truth. "It felt right, so right," Chloe agreed, her smile widening. And then she leaned in and kissed her again, a quick, sweet, joyful press of her lips that sealed the promise of the first one. It was a kiss that said, "This is real. We are real." And for the first time in 2 years, 4 months, and 25 days, Alara truly, completely believed it. In the breathless, sacred space after the kiss, with their foreheads still pressed together and the scent of tea and vanilla hanging in the air, a new feeling began to creep in around the edges of Alara's overwhelming joy. It was a cold, quiet whisper of fear. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words spoken so softly they were almost absorbed by the silence. Chloe's hands, which were still cradling Alara's face, tightened their gentle grip. She didn't pull away. "Me too," she confessed, her own voice a murmur. "I'm terrified." The shared admission was a strange comfort. It validated the magnitude of what had just happened. This wasn't a simple, fleeting moment. It was a seismic shift, and the aftershocks were bound to be unsettling. "What does this mean?" Alara asked, finally opening her eyes to look at Chloe. "For us? For our friendship." The word friendship already felt inadequate, a relic from a past life. Chloe's expression was serious, her usual easygoing charisma replaced by a profound earnestness. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't have a map for this, Al. The one I was following just led me off a cliff." She managed a small, wry smile. "But maybe it means our friendship was just the foundation for this. Maybe it was the first chapter, not the whole book." The metaphor was so perfectly Chloe, so hopeful and literary, that it made Alara's heart ache with a new kind of love, one that was allowed to exist out in the open. But what about everything? Alara's mind was a whirlwind of practicalities and anxieties. "You just got out of a relationship. A relationship with a man. Are you sure? Are you sure this isn't just a reaction?" A rebound onto the safest person you know. The questions were born of her deepest insecurities, the fear that this was too good to be true, that she was just a temporary harbor in Chloe's storm. Chloe pulled back slightly, her hands dropping to rest on Alara's shoulders. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. "Listen to me," she said, her tone firm but gentle. "This is not a rebound. You are not a port in a storm. You are the storm, Elle. You're the thunder and the lightning I didn't know I was missing." Being with Mark was like living in black and white. It was fine, it was comfortable, it was what I thought life was supposed to be. But being with you, even just as friends, has always been in color. I think I was afraid to admit how much I preferred it." She paused, taking a deep breath, her eyes clouding over with a dawning realization. "It makes so much sense now," she said, almost to herself. "All those fights with him. The things I complained about. The dismissiveness, the feeling of not being heard. I wasn't just complaining about him. I was complaining that he wasn't you." Her eyes refocused on Alara, sharp with a new, startling clarity. "I was measuring every relationship against what I had with you," she said, the words hitting Alara with the force of a revelation. "And they all came up short. I just didn't understand what I was measuring them against. I thought I was looking for a better boyfriend, but I was looking for you." The confession was so much more than an "I love you," it was a recontextualization of their entire history. It meant that Alara hadn't just been a silent, pining observer. She had been an active, albeit unconscious, participant in Chloe's own story all along. She hadn't been just a friend, she had been the standard. The gold standard. "So no," Chloe finished, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not confused. I'm clearer than I've ever been in my entire life. The only thing I'm scared of is that I almost missed this. That I almost let you hide from me forever." Alara felt the last of her own fear dissolve, washed away by the sheer force of Chloe's conviction. She was right. The real terror wasn't in what came next, it was in the possibility of a future where this moment had never happened. "So, what do we do?" Alara asked, a real smile, bright and hopeful, finally breaking through. "Well," Chloe said, a playful glint returning to her eyes. "First, I think you should probably kiss me again. Just to be sure." For science, Alara laughed, a genuine, happy sound that felt foreign and wonderful. She leaned in and did as she was told, capturing Chloe's lips in a kiss that was full of laughter and promise, and the dizzying relief of a shared future. When they parted, Chloe's expression turned serious again. "And then," she said, "we figure it out. Together. We take it one day at a time. We'll be clumsy, and we'll probably make mistakes, but we'll do it together." "That's the only rule, one day at a time," Alara agreed, the phrase feeling less like a limitation and more like a gift. An infinite string of days, stretching out before them, that they would get to navigate side by side. She looked at the woman in front of her, her best friend, the love of her life, the center of her universe, and saw not an obstacle course of anxieties, but an open road. It was a terrifying, unknown path, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to walk it. Because Chloe would be walking it with her. They would figure it out. Together. 3 months later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the dancing dust motes in the air and casting a warm, golden glow over the room. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the smell of cinnamon from the French toast sizzling in the pan. Alara stood at the stove, a spatula in hand, humming softly to a song playing from the small speaker on the counter. She was wearing an old, paint-splattered t-shirt and a pair of soft shorts, and she had never felt more at peace. A pair of arms snaked around her waist from behind, and a soft chin came to rest on her shoulder. "Good morning," Chloe murmured, her voice still thick with sleep. She pressed a gentle kiss to the side of Alara's neck, a gesture that still sent a delightful shiver down her spine every single time. "Morning, sleepyhead," Alara said, leaning back into the embrace. "I thought you were going to sleep all day." The smell of coffee was too persuasive, Chloe mumbled into her shoulder. "And also, my bed was cold without you in it," Alara smiled, flipping the toast with a practiced flick of her wrist. Their new normal. It had settled around them as comfortably as a well-worn blanket. The initial weeks had been a flurry of conversations, of redefining boundaries and relearning each other in this new context. There had been moments of fear and awkwardness, the clumsy navigation of moving from friends to something more. Chloe had dealt with the final, messy logistics of Mark, a box of his things left on his doorstep, a short, final phone call that had ended with a sense of closure rather than heartbreak. But any awkwardness had quickly dissolved, replaced by an overwhelming sense of rightness. They had fallen into a rhythm that felt more natural than any that had come before it. Their lives, which had always run on parallel tracks, had finally, beautifully merged. Waking up together in Alara's bed, which had quickly become their bed, felt as normal as breathing. Sharing quiet domestic moments like this felt like something they had been doing for a lifetime. Chloe tightened her arms around Alara's waist, swaying them both gently in time with the music. "This is nice," she said softly. "The French toast or the slow dancing in the kitchen at 9 in the morning?" Alara asked, turning her head to press a quick kiss to Chloe's cheek. "Yes," Chloe answered simply, nuzzling her face into Alara's hair. "All of it. This. Us." Alara slid the finished toast onto a plate and turned off the stove. She twisted in Chloe's arms to face her, looping her own arms around Chloe's neck. She looked into her girlfriend's soft, sleepy eyes, still full of the same wonder and awe as they had been that night in the kitchen 3 months ago. The love she saw reflected there was a constant, steady flame that warmed her to her very core. "It's funny," Alara said, her thumb tracing the line of Chloe's jaw. "For years, I was so terrified of this. Of changing things. I thought if I just kept everything exactly the same, I wouldn't lose you, and now?" Chloe asked, her hands resting on the small of Alara's back. "And now I realize that staying the same would have been the real loss," Alara said, her voice full of a quiet certainty that had been hard-won. "We would have missed all of this." She gestured around the sun-drenched kitchen, at the 2 coffee mugs sitting side by side on the counter, at the rumpled evidence of their shared life. It was a life built not on grand, dramatic gestures, but on small, accumulated moments of tenderness and truth. It was built on a foundation of years of friendship, but the structure they were now creating was something new, something infinitely more beautiful. Chloe's smile was radiant. She leaned in, her lips brushing against Alara's. "I read somewhere that the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be seen," she whispered. "I spent my whole life hiding and I didn't even know it. Thank you for seeing me, Elle." "Even when I couldn't see myself always," Alara promised against her mouth before their lips met in a slow, sweet kiss that tasted of cinnamon and coffee and the quiet, extraordinary bliss of a Saturday morning. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms in the golden light, Alara thought about the long, painful tally she used to keep. 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days of waiting. It had felt like an eternity then, a sentence of quiet suffering. But now she understood. It wasn't a sentence, it was a prelude. It was the necessary, quiet beginning to the most beautiful story she had ever known. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the best chapters were still yet to be written. She was finally exactly where she needed to be.